In this video, we are going to create the layout for our profile activity. So our profile activity is going to allow us to change our avatar, change our display name, and change our email address. So here's some function, or it's also going to allow us to change our password. So for example, I could click this action bar item up here to update my password, or I could click this edit button to update my username or my display name and my email, or I can click on the avatar to change my avatar. So in this video, we're going to just worry about creating the layout. And the layout's going to give us some interesting challenges. Because if you take a look, I want my tablet layout to be slightly different than my phone layout. So I want my phone layout to have my two items here at the bottom, below my avatar, and my tablet, I want them to be on the right-hand side. So we're going to accomplish that with some code. We're not going to write two distinct layouts, which we could. We could write one layout file for tablets and one for phones, but you guys have already seen how to do that. Instead, I'm going to show you guys an example of how we can change some layout parameters based on whether or not we're a tablet, and that'll be interesting. And then we'll get our menu and stuff and all put together, but we're not going to put in any other logic besides that in this video. We're just going to keep things to showing the layout. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I basically just want to write out the layout first. Write out the entire layout, and then we'll write out some code in our base activity, and then we'll finish off by implementing our actual profile activity class. So let's jump into our activity profile, and notice what we have already here. So right now we have our toolbar, and then we have a text view. So not that exciting. I am going to go ahead and I'm going to change our preview to be a Nexus 7, however, because I want to do our tablet view first. I want to design this and have the preview showing as if it's a tablet, and then design that, and then we will regress to the phone using code when we're done. All right, so I'm going to start off here by, instead of this text view, I'm going to insert a relative layout. So I'm going to say relative layout, and with a layout width of match parent, a layout height of match parent. And so this relative layout is going to take up the entire screen right here. And it's going to take up the entire screen after the toolbar. So then inside of this, the first thing I want to do is, so if we have a relative layout, the first thing I'm going to want to place is my avatar and my tap to change button. And there's also something that you guys can't see, but I also want there to be a frame layout that expands on the entirety of this widget, of the entirety of both the image and the text view right here and the button. I want there to be a frame layout that expands that is semi-transparent and black, so that when our, and also has a progress bar in it, so that when our avatar is updating, it'll fade into this sort of updating avatar user interface widgety thing, and then when it's done updating, that progress bar in the background will disappear. So we want to go ahead and do that too. So, like I said, the first thing we want to do is position that. And how are we going to position it? Well, it seems pretty obvious that we have some padding here, and we can apply that padding to pretty much the entire relative layout. So, in fact, we can go into the relative layout itself and give it some padding. And that's what I'm going to start off with. Then we'll do our image. So let's go ahead and on our relative layout, I'm going to say padding, and I'm going to give it a padding of, let's say, 18 dp. Then I'm going to create my image view, and my image view is going to be 128 dp wide and 128 dp tall. Then inside, then in addition, my image view, I'm going to have to give it some other parameters. First of all, I want to give it a, well, in this case, actually, no, we have to give it one parameter, which is our ID. Let me go ahead and hide my project window so I have some more horizontal space here, so I can take a look at the preview and zoom in a little bit so you guys can see what's going on. So on my ID, I'm going to say activity profile avatar is what I'm going to call this this image view. Okay, so let's do our text view next. So I'm going to say text view. The width is going to, of our text view is going to be wrap content. The height is going to be wrap content. You'll see in a moment that the text view width doesn't matter, because again, we want this text view to expand to be the size of that image. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to give it text. I'm giving it text pretty early in the process, so that I have something visual to see. And I'll say tap to change. Then what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and lay this, or give it a background. So I'm going to give it a background so that we can see how wide it's becoming, how big it's becoming. And I'm going to give a background of 2196F3. And I'm going to give it a text color of white. So FFF. So now you see it looks like this, and it's obviously not positioned correctly. I want it down here underneath the image. That's actually really easy to do with the relative layout. All I have to do is I have to say below, so layout below, and I'm going to specify profile underscore avatar. So now it appears below the avatar. You can see it right there. In fact, to make this maybe a little bit more obvious, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to jump into the image view, and I'm going to give it a background of, let's say, AAA. So that you guys can see, as I'm positioning my button, how the image view relates to it, even though we don't have an actual image in it yet. So I'm saying below the avatar. Then what I want to say is align end with profile avatar. What does align end do? Well, aligned end will align the end of this control with the end of that control. So now you see it's aligned to the right. However, we still have a problem here because it got pulled over to the right. So let's pull it back over to the left. Let's stretch it. So I'm going to say align start profile avatar. So you see now it's stretched. So now what I want to do is I want to give it some padding. So I'm going to give it a padding start of 16 dp, padding end of 16 dp, a padding top of 8 dp, and a padding bottom of 8 dp. And that'll make our tap to change button look like that. All right, so really the last thing we have to do here is we have to give it an ID. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say ID equals plus ID slash, and I'm going to say activity profile change avatar. And now we have our tap to change button. Okay, so now that we've done that, now we have to do that invisible thing, that thing that you can't see in this example right here, because we have that implemented now. Now we have to do that thing that you can't see, that frame. I want a frame layout to be basically take up the entire space of the image and the tap to change, and I want there to be a progress bar in the middle of it. So that's also really easy to do. I'm going to say frame layout. I'm going to give it a layout width of wrap content, layout height of wrap content. Now, before I start messing with its layout parameters, I am going to give it a background. I'm going to give it a background so that I can see it as I move it around. I'm going to give it a background of AA0000. Yeah, AA000000. So a semi-transparent black. AA is going to be the alpha component of that, and AA is a fairly big number in the in hex. A relatively big number in hex compared to 0, of course. All right, so we have our background. Let's go ahead and align this. How would we go about doing this? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. If I say align top to profile avatar, align bottom to profile change avatar. See what I'm doing? I'm stretching it. I'm saying align the top of this view to the top of our image. Align the bottom of this view to the bottom of our tap to change button. Then align the start to our profile avatar and align the end to our profile avatar. And now what you see is suddenly, once I got that last parameter in there, or the last attribute set, notice how there's this nice black overlay on top of both our image and our tap to change button. So that's really cool. So we can now show and hide this frame layout when we're in the process of updating our avatar to give the user some really nice feedback that his avatar is being updated. Now, there is one more thing I want to do here, however, or a couple more things I want to do here. I want to give it an ID. So I'm going to give it an ID of activity profile avatar progress frame. And I want to set its clickable to true. So what does clickable do? The clickable attribute basically indicates whether or not this view group will eat click events. So if I set it to true, this thing that's appearing over my tap to change button is going to act like a barrier. And when I click on it, it's going to stop that click event from reaching the button. That means when I have this thing visible, when this frame is visible, you won't be able to hit the tap to change button, which is the behavior I want. Again, this whole frame layout is nothing more than a progress indicator showing us that our avatar is being uploaded to some server somewhere and it's being updated. Okay, so the last thing I need to do with our frame is create our progress view. So I'm going to say progress view with a width of wrap content, height of wrap content. And then what I want to do is I want it to be centered in the frame layout. And that's really easy to do in a frame layout because I can simply say layout gravity center. Oop, not center vertical, center. And that'll make it appear in the center. The final thing I want to do is set indeterminate only to true. So the progress bar will manifest as one of those infinitely long spinny things that you see when you're doing a network operation that you can't predict how long it's actually taking. Okay. So that is our frame layout. So now all we have left to do is we have our two text edit texts, our display name and our email. What I'm going to do to make this easier to implement, or to make this easier to switch between tablet and phone versions, I'm going to implement this as a linear layout. And on the tablet version, I'm simply going to have it appear on the right-hand side of my my avatar. And then on phones, I'll have it appear underneath my avatar. Because if you recall, this is the phone layout that I want. I want the two items to appear down there. So by grouping them together into a linear layout, it'll make it very easy to change where I have them displayed. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and open up a linear layout, and I'm going to give it a layout width of match parent and a height of wrap content. Then I'm going to specify where I want it to be positioned. I want it to be positioned to the end of our profile avatar. So that'll make it a position over here where I have my mouse cursor. And then I'm going to give it a margin start of 16 dp. So it's 16 pixels, or let's make it consistent with our padding. Let's make it 18 dp. So it's going to be 18 pixels away from the beginning of this layout. All right, and then the last thing I want to do, well, it's irrelevant, actually. I don't need to do that. I was going to say I could do an align top if I wanted to for my profile avatar, but this is unnecessary. The reason this is unnecessary is because the top of this whole layout is going to be the same thing that avatar is using for the top. All right, so let's go ahead and put in our two edit texts. Or, of course, we have to make sure we have an orientation of vertical first on our linear layout. So the first edit text will have a match parent wrap content, which is pretty standard for edit texts. We'll have a hint of display name. And we'll have a margin bottom of 8 dp. We'll have a single line set to true, so there's only one line. And then we'll have a ID of activity profile display name. Then we'll do the same thing for our email. So the email will have a width of match parent, a height of wrap content, a hint of email. However, I am going to go ahead and put in an input type of text email address. And what that'll do is by putting in this input type attribute, it's going to tell Android, give Android a hint as to how or what kind of soft keyboard to show. So the soft keyboard that pops up when I select this is going to look a little bit different than the soft keyboard that would pop up for my display name. So it'll give you quick access to the @ symbol, for example. All right, so I'll go ahead and set it single line to true, and I'll set its ID to activity profile email. And that's it. That's pretty much all of our profile thing, our profile layout. I mean, it's an interesting layout to implement, but once you kind of see it done, there's not a whole lot else to say about it. So I will say, I am going to point out in what way I would make this be my phone layout. So how would I convert this from my tablet layout to my phone layout? Well, it's really easy with this linear layout. Basically, instead of saying, I want to replace this layout to end of with layout below, and I'm going to say layout below activity profile change avatar. Then I'm going to get rid of its margin start and change its margin start to a margin top. So now you see, by switching those parameters around, those layout parameters around, I'm able to change this from a tablet view to a phone view. So that's what we're going to be doing in code a little bit later. All right, so now that we have that done, let's go ahead and make sure to give our linear layout an ID. So I'm going to give an ID of activity profile and, I don't know, text fields. Sounds like a good name or ID to give that, so that we can reference it from within code to change its layout parameters. Okay, so now let's go ahead and jump into our base activity, because there's one thing I want to do in the base activity here in this video, and that is I want to write code that detects if we're in a tablet or not. And I defined whether or not we're in a tablet by if the amount of device-independent pixels is greater or equal to 600. So if our screen is wider than 600 device-independent pixels, I consider this to be a tablet. So what I'm going to do here is, in my base activity, I'm going to do a protected boolean is tablet boolean. Tablet, really? Is tablet. And then in our onCreate method, I will determine if we are a tablet or not. And that's actually pretty easy to do. What I need to do is I need to get the display metrics for the screen. So I'm going to say display metrics equals get resources, get display metrics. So this gets me information about my display, my screen size, my screen density, and all that fun stuff. Then I'm going to say is tablet equals metrics dot width in pixels divided by metrics dot density, not density DPI, is greater or equal to 600. So if our device-independent pixels, which are calculated by getting our width in normal pixels and dividing it by our density, if that's greater or equal to 600, then that means that we are in a tablet, and we should do tablet-y type things. We're not going to need this variable a whole lot of times in the series, but it is very helpful in this particular case because, like I said, I want to change the layout depending on if we have a tablet or not, or are a tablet or not. Okay, so let's go ahead and use this now. So let's jump into our profile activity, and on the Yora create, after we set the nav bar, I want to go ahead and say, if we're not a tablet, then I need to change the layout parameters of our linear layout. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say view and then text fields equals find view by ID r.id.text fields. Then what I'm going to do is I need to get the layout params. I need to modify the layout params. What are layout params? Well, I mentioned this in an earlier video in this series. Layout parameters are any of the attributes that start with layout underscore, and they're different depending on what view group this layout is nested in. So relative layouts have their own layout params, linear layouts have their own layout params, frame layouts have their own layout params, and so on. And it allows us to describe information at the view level of how we want this view to be laid out to its parent. If you're familiar with things like XAML, this would be, you can kind of think of layout parameters as dependency properties, but a really stripped down version of them. So basically there's a layout parameter class for every single view group that supports different layout parameters, and we need to modify the layout parameters for this linear layout. So the question is what layout parameter class do these attributes come from? It's actually very easy to answer that question, because I can simply go up here to its parent view, its view group, and say, oh, well, the view group is a relative layout. That means that I use relative layout params. So coming into profile activity, the first thing we need to do is we need to get the layout parameters, extract them from our text fields. Now remember, our text fields is this linear layout right here. We need to extract its layout parameters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say relative layout dot layout parameters. So the layout params that I'm getting are from Android widget relative layout. And then I'm going to say params equals cast to relative layout dot layout parameters text fields dot get layout params. So get layout params function. So this will return me the layout parameters, the relative layout parameters for the text fields. Okay, so now what I have to do is, let's start off with the margin first. Now, you might think this would be what you want. You might think, okay, we can do params. Oh, hey, look, there's a set margins method. Well, we want to set its left margin to 0. We want its top margin to be, what do we want that to be again? We want that to be 18 dp. Then we want the right margin to be 0 and the bottom margin to be 0. So you might think that's how you would set that margin to what we want. Remember, I want it to change from a left margin to a top margin. However, this is incorrect. The reason this is incorrect is the set margins method expects that we're passing in normal pixels. Normal, real, physical pixels, not device-independent pixels. Whereas up here, we specified our margin start as device-independent pixels. So what do? How do we set our margins, our top margin to 18 device-independent pixels? Well, we can actually cheat here. It's very easy to cheat in this case. I can replace this 18 with params.get margin start. So I'm cheating. How am I cheating? Well, we know that the margin start of this linear layout is already set to 18 device-independent pixels. We know that the calculation to convert device-independent pixels to physical pixels has been made. So now we can just take that computed value and use it for the top margin instead. As you see, the second parameter to this method is the top margin. All right, so what do we have to do after that? Well, the next thing we have to do is we have to get rid of this layout to end of. We need this to go away. We don't want it to be to the end of our avatar anymore. To do that, I'm simply going to do params.remove rule. Then I'm going to pass in relative layout dot end of. So this gets rid of that attribute. All right, so now the last thing we need to do is we want this to appear now below our tap to change button, our profile change avatar. So how do we do that? Well, coming back here, I can simply say params.add rule, passing in relative layout dot below for the first parameter, and then for the second parameter, passing in the ID of the thing I want it to appear below, which is r.id dot change avatar. All right, now that I've configured my relative layout parameters, I can simply say text fields dot set layout params and pass params back in, and that will replace the layout parameters and everything will be awesome. So let's go ahead and hit play. So we have our phone and we have our tablet. Let's go ahead and log in. Let's switch over to our profile activity and check that out. On the tablet, we have it to the right, and on the phone, we have it below. So that's exactly the behavior that we're looking for here. Anyway, I think that just about wraps up this video. As you see, our progress thing is still being being displayed. That's okay. We'll hide it programmatically once we get to writing the actual logic of our profile page. So yeah, I guess we'll see you guys in the next video.